It is July 21st, 2023, and where I am in New York, in the White House at the moment, it's not a perfect and fair system. I'm looking at the forefathers of the approved faces on several of the federal notes, the United States of America reminder notes, for what the presidential dynasty has been in these lands prior to my arrival and for my arrival. And knowing that as the forefathers, they, above all else, themselves, their safety and security, and that of their ancestors should be number one priority at all times. In like a family sense. So I am sitting here watching the White House perform where it is not a perfect system. The person, I did not vote for them. My voice was silenced. In fact, the vote that I voted for did not come to fruition. And I did not pick the nominees for the representation of the party for which they are. So I feel like my voice, and I've been like, there, I almost feel like somebody is trying to disenfranchise me from, and I'm trying to orient and ground myself in what have the mortal realm announced. I happen by notes, by seal, by a bunch of different things in these lands, have a different part and a piece of American history. And I see it being attacked consistently. Now, I'm going to show MCU, which is the Marvel superhero, and like mythical, magical, where they actually speak of gods and mortals. I'm trying to see what message they put out into the universe in 2017 to ground myself in their version. I've also been called Hela, which frightens me because I don't know how, during their attempts to silence me, how they're then using other pieces of that allowance from the gods. Like, again, the mortals in my POV have pretty much trapped me amongst them, and I don't have access to the gods or the god level. I'm still being held in 8-foot ceilings. That's a measurement and a mark that's incredibly important. So I'm looking at, between the JU and the SU, what MCU put out there under the name that they gave.
Sister.
You're still alive.
Love what you've done for us. Redecorating, I see.
It seems our father's solution to every problem was to cover it up.
Or to cast it out. He told you you were worthy. Said the same thing to me.
You see, you never knew him. Not at his best. Odin and I drowned entire civilizations in blood and tears. Where do you think all this gold came from? And then, one day, he decided to become a benevolent king. To foster peace, to protect life. To have you.
I understand why you're angry and why my sister and technically have a claim to the throne. And believe me, I would love for someone else to rule, but it can't be you. You're just the worst.
Okay, get up. You're in my seat.
Your father once told me, the wise king never seeks out war.
But must always be ready for it.
I was born under the 8 and the 3 on a 78 into the 19 for century.
Even a blind man could see it. Now you remind me of Dad.
Now I'm going to go from that. That is something that they propagate over here within this monetary system and this portrait of what the presidential dynasty looked like before my arrival, with ancestors that still exist here. And I'm going to put up, they have a mention of RJ, RJ, RFK, JR, part of the Kennedy presidential dynasty. And he's being censored by censorship. And when I listen on News Nation, the verse spoken orally is one message, but if I pause it, there's a written verse that's very different than the spoken verse. And then I go further, and then on CBS, Channel 2, because one is an outlet, the other one's the mainstream media, I listen, and they've sectioned it much differently on their episode 145 during the year 2023. And then it goes into Kamala Harris making a announcement, which again, when I listen to her, it sounds like what she is, like the emotions she's drumming up amongst that civilization seems almost dangerous to the president's health and safety. That's my concern. And again, currently I'm existing in New York under an imperfect system. Somehow she got the vice president ticket and she's making these announcements and I'm listening, and it's frightening the way that she's portraying, and she's not even one of the civilizations yet. And there's something going on with social wars, so just like unannounced wars. But the headlines, from a god perspective, what are the mortals, because she is not a god, she doesn't fit the presidential ancestry dynasty. In fact, I was thinking of how to preface this. I'm like, okay, so there's the United States of America, which their territory is the 50 states in North America. And then there's U.S. run territories outside of the continental United States of America. And it almost seems there's been so much of something that I don't recognize, but they call it DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that now it's crept into areas where so much of the protection is almost being misled and misguided with very few boundaries. I don't see boundaries anywhere. And that's frightening for my own safety, the safety of my children, and the safety of the President of the United States. So that's of utmost concern during this time period where even the White House is not running in a perfect system according to forefathers. The other headlines are, in this particular episode, Washington Commanders were sold. The NFL owner, led by Josh Harris, sold to something called an Irvin Magic Johnson. So it has the word ear in it, which concerns me. Then Eric Schmidt, Mitchell Rails, and then someone called Mark Eins. Now in German, Eins means one in translation. So again, I'm watching this group and I'm just watching. And then it says, in just headlines, without the stories, Messi mania takes Miami. And then at 8:34 a.m., there was a scroll at the bottom that I caught. I took a photo of it. I put it on my static Facebook page where it says, efforts to help sex trafficking victims in New York is stalled. Now, again, where I grew up, they did not speak of sex trafficking. I don't know what that entails. I know there's some level of functioning government that investigates these things, knows of the procedures, but it has not been spoken of to me directly at Realm and Real World. Um, but I know they have mortals working within that level of just ice in justice in these lands while I am here. So I'm gonna show the JFK, and then I'm gonna go into the Kamala Harris event that she held that they were alerting. That happened, I believe they mentioned it was yesterday.
All right, still on Capitol Hill, only today instead of next week, Democratic.
But my point is that I think that some of the U.S. territories have been moved to the interior of the United States, and I liken it to almost if I had a beautiful fish tank of fantail guppies, beautiful different fantails, all different colors and artistic creations that God made. And then all of a sudden someone dumps a tigerfish, which is a predatory fish, in amongst my beautiful fantail guppies and disrupts the entire living ecosystem of that fish tank. That's almost what New York feels like at the moment. Is somebody installed a tigerfish that is hurting all of my fantail guppies.
Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was in the hot seat today, and a heated debate ensued. House Republicans invited Kennedy to testify in a hearing on online censorship and free speech. In his opening remarks, the 2024 Democratic hopeful slammed.
Now, what I don't understand is in past presidencies, when they speak of the most respected presidential office, I see how they speak of Finland's president. They call him the presidential palace. I mean, it is such a different honor, it feels. The way that the Finnish love and admire that office as opposed to what's going on here at the moment.
Slammed members of his own party for signing a letter to disinvite him from the hearing over his controversial views.
I've devoted my life to the values of this party. There's 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing.
Democrats, however, wasted no time blasting Republicans for giving Kennedy a platform after his recent public comments about COVID, which they have called racist and anti-Semitic.
They intentionally chose to elevate this rhetoric to give these harmful, dangerous views a platform in the halls of the United States Congress.
Okay, now here's a thing that I've noticed amongst the mortals, which she is a mortal. They keep using the U.S. Congress. I'm like, correct, but we're in the USA, not the U.S. outer territories. There seems somewhere at the business office and the investigatory office and some employment contracts and some bad union negotiations, perhaps involved with some kind of sport and some shift in the wealth. There has been some ongoing, growing concerns inside the halls of this territory which I'm just keeping an eye on and making notes of, for my own safety and the safety of my children.
That's endorsing that speech. That's not just supporting free speech.
News Nation's Kelly Meyer is live in Washington for us tonight. And Kelly, there were some fiery moments.
I don't know who was giving her a voice, an opinion, or to be a judge. I did not vote for her. And if I had an election, there were essays that were already submitted when I was younger.
Fiery moments in that hearing today.
Yeah, that's right, Elizabeth. Dramatic moments between Democrats really taking on one another. The Democratic candidate for president reaching out and talking with members of his own party that were firing back in these exchanges. They actually moved to move this hearing into executive session over RFK Jr.'s comments. And really, he had the chance today to speak for the first time and go on the record.
You're misstating.
No.
You
I
are.
quoted what you said earlier, and it is directly what you said.
A fiery back and forth on Capitol Hill, pitting Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. against members of his own party.
And no matter what you may think, Mr. Kennedy, and I revere your name, you're not here to propound your case for censorship. You are here for cynical reasons to be used politically by that side of the aisle to embarrass the current president of the United States.
Recent comments made by RFK Jr. taking center stage at today's hearing on censorship. The presidential candidate claiming at a private dinner over the...
Now, what it actually says with his face on it on News Nation is RFK Jr.'s leaked remarks on COVID-19. COVID-19, there is an argument that is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. Now, what's interesting is that it says Nazi right there. It says Nazi in that word. But when I read it, it reads visually to me one way. When I hear the woman's words, she censors herself. And now, if I didn't have a remote to pause and make highlight of this, I would have lost the message completely. I would have been whatever.
over the weekend that COVID-19 targeted certain groups while sparing Chinese people and Jewish people. Democrats banding together to stop the hearing before it even started, calling the comments anti-Semitic and anti-Asian. RFK Jr.
Now, when I was growing up, I don't know what this word anti-Semitic means. They didn't even mention this word. It was not a vocabulary word spoken. It was not taught to the children that were growing up. I have no idea what it means.
Jr. says his comments were misrepresented.
I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic.
The larger hearing, a debate over the definition of censorship.
When you look at Mr. Kennedy's tweet, there was nothing in there that was factually inaccurate.
RFK Jr. invited by Republicans to testify about his belief that big tech and big government are blocking free speech, including his own. Earlier this year, YouTube removed one of his videos for spreading what the company said was vaccine misinformation. Instagram, owned by Facebook, removed RFK Jr.'s account for sharing what they called debunked claims about COVID-19. Democrats believe censorship is protecting the public from misinformation and from people spewing.
My problem is that there are United Nations children functioning at some level inside of the United States. They're not necessarily nations that look like the customary, the traditions, and documented forefathers of this nation allowed in this territory with Federal Reserve note and with the United States of America on label. So there's this disconnect and this break. Almost, I feel like they're trying to disenfranchise me from the franchise for which I was born and delivered. And I don't know how to protect myself amongst this, because even when, like, you look at reporting agencies on the television, at the local police station, I look at what they're recruiting for the armed forces, it looks like a United Nation mission all over the place. And I don't know how to get clean lines of just United States of America any longer by Federal Reserve noted, agreed upon, and circulated monetary, which has a U.S. Treasury backing, along with some other buildings.
People spewing hate. Republicans believe this suppresses speech and censors disfavored viewpoints. To RFK Jr., censorship is un-American.
Censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy.
Now, RFK Jr. says that Democrats in the committee were trying to censor his speech and even making a broader effort to censor his run for the White House. Elizabeth?
Kelly Meyer reporting from Washington. Thank you. Coming up.
Now, I'm going to go directly to the CBS this morning, which cuts out to private events that that RFK Jr. was at, that has a credit to the New York Post. That's very important, and I'm going to point that out. And it's on the CBS E145, and the year is 2023.
The best-known challenger to President Biden for the 2024 Democratic nomination took a barrage of criticism from other Democrats at a congressional hearing. I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His recent comments about COVID-19 have opened him up to all sorts of charges, among them anti-Semitism, a charge he rejected yesterday. Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett has more.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., part of an American political dynasty, is running against President Biden and calling him
an American political dynasty. So some of the whatever we evolved into in this day and age, talking about responsibility and accountability, he's one of the predecessors.
Himself a victim of censorship.
Anti-Semitism, racism. These are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me.
House Republicans invited Kennedy and gave him a platform to discuss free.
Why is the mortal realm at any level able to punish or there has to be some level of accountability, and I agree. But the level that is going on right now is, it feels like it's partially to disenfranchise and partially to dishonor our own working features that are important to uphold their importance at world stage globally as participants of they're not the only earthlings on this planet, or Americas are not just the only participating mortal realm on this planet.
Free speech. It became a venue to evaluate Kennedy's own speech. Like this recent comment describing the COVID virus as a possible bioweapon.
Now, that speaks, I believe, to FCC and telecommunications. It says New York, and again, I say the words Julying the 15th because it has the two letters JU, just so MCU and SU are all corrected in orienting oneself in this it can be at times very disorienting conversation.
COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. COVID-19 is targeted to attack.
Now, if COVID is that like a cooperation to visually have a multi-spectrum in this DEI like theory they throw out there, which I think the conspirers are using in order to sell markets and like break into markets, break into all sorts of things. And essentially, like, they strive to destroy the fabric of America. I myself have been harmed throughout this entire process.
Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
Kennedy's sister, Carrie Kennedy, had this reaction. I strongly condemn my brother's deplorable and untruthful remarks last week about COVID being engineered for ethnic targeting. House Democrats denounced Kennedy.
My own children have been the targets of brutal anti-Semitism on social media. You fan those flames and jeopardize their safety.
Kennedy also denied that he was opposed to vaccines.
I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination.
This is what Kennedy said about childhood vaccines in
I don't know what they talk about with this vax thing. I've been trying to figure it out, but it eludes me at the moment.
2021.
I see somebody on a hiking trail carrying a little baby, and I said, I better not get him vaccinated. If he hears it from 10 other people, maybe he won't do it.
For years, Kennedy has endorsed a linkage, repeatedly rejected in scientific journals, between vaccinations for childhood diseases and autism. His profile, especially among Trumpist Republicans like Steve Bannon, has grown with harsh denunciations of COVID vaccines or proof of vaccine status.
Trusting the experts is not a function of science.
Millions are saved because of a vaccine that was developed in record time, and we ought to be celebrating that.
Politically, Kennedy trades on the family name and its mystique, even as he positions himself as an outsider and an underdog. There's evidence Democrats are beginning to catch on. A recent national poll showed Kennedy's support in the Democratic primary at 14%, down from 20% about a month ago. And a poll this week in New Hampshire had his favorability rating among Democrats at 9%, down from 15% in April. For their part, House Republicans, who see Kennedy as a kind of anti-Biden agent of chaos, said they had no regrets about elevating his theories about COVID or other topics. Michelle?
Major Garrett, thank you. There is controversy today over new standards for teaching Black history in the state of Florida.
Okay, so it goes from that into this, which is where Kamala Harris is. And on that same Ragnarok movie from 2017, there's this very interesting conversation that they put on there between Thor. And again, I'm not the executive producer. I'm just an innocent witness to what they put out there. And I only just recently had access to it.
The new curriculum from the Florida Board of Education includes instruction for middle school students to learn, quote, how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. That language drew some sharp criticism, including from Vice President Kamala Harris, who is heading to Florida today.
Okay, but fast forward, living inside of United States of America, whether slavery existed, whether it wasn't, however it was used, she in her lifetime benefited from living here, regardless of what it was called, regardless of what was taught. She's sitting in a vice president's seat inside the White House, while outside the White House, the system, several of the states, the business office, all sorts of things are acting in a disingenuous manner, looking, and I'm frightened for disenfranchising, where I'm looking everywhere to see where its ugly head rears. And here we are. I'm listening to how she's posing her conversation in front of her audience using the vice presidency. And as a child of New York with children, if this is what's going on in the front face of the White House, I am frightened for what goes on behind closed doors.
Just yesterday in the state of Florida, they decided middle school students will be taught that enslaved people benefited from slavery.
But everybody wanted the truth, because if it wasn't just employee contracts through the serfdom project or through the serfdom, whatever keeps us safe, and we are land tenants of some sort on someone's books in whatever language they use, in order to get from nowhere in the mortal realm to the vice presidency of the United States and not even match a forefather's ancestry, there's some stuff going on that she benefited from. And I don't know what it was, but they use this word slavery like fuel in a rocket to get themselves into all sorts of places, which I feel puts my personal security in jeopardy.
They insult us in an attempt to gaslight us, and we will not stand for it.
The state's law.
Actually, it looks like she's actively participating in her own gaslighting of her own people. And I don't know whose permission she has to sit on Joe Biden's meal ticket, to get into that office and to even have this level of privilege when she's abusing the absolute authority privilege, especially while we're functioning in a unfair and unjust process. And those are truthful statements, because it looks more like United Nations by having her there, which is UN, as opposed to just us, US, running the main machine.
State's largest teachers union called the new standards a step backward and said students deserve the full truth of American history. This comes after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill.
But when they get the full truth, if they're going on the fact that there was slavery before, because again, in my day, my parents did not own slaves, my grandparents did not own slaves, and that's all I can actually verify. Other than that, it's just story. But she herself is using it as gaslighting her own people in the public media, using her public voice to stir up what looks to me like trouble for people like myself who are out doing other things, trying to make sure that there's no trash in the neighborhood on the floor and whatever I'm capable of doing while I'm here being held as a GOD amongst the mortals.
Bill last year regulating how race is taught in public schools. For its part, the Florida Department of Education says the standards do incorporate all components of Black history, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Now to the investigation into the Gilgo Beach murder suspect.
To me, it's almost like maybe a serial killer. Like, just destroying families' reputation, just trying wherever it goes like a tiger fish to just rip through the beautiful fantail guppies that exist. And I don't understand why or how they're allowed to exist in that fashion anywhere in the system at the, place where we are at as a corporation, as at one nation, and with our own monetary system here, an investigatory process, and all of the 3 checks and balances that we have, that the United States of America put together before we arrived. So that's my concern at the moment. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way universe, galaxy is broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.